239 days away from competitive basketball is supposed to create rust. Hesitation. Bad timing. A slow start. But Caitlin Clark came back for Team USA and turned all of that upside down in less than 20 minutes. In her senior national team debut against Senegal on March 11, 2026, she put up 17 points and 12 assists in just 19 minutes as the United States rolled to a 110-46 win in the FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in San Juan. It was her first competitive game in 8 months, and instead of easing into the action, she immediately took control of the pace and looked like the most dangerous playmaker on the floor. FIBA's own coverage called her 12 assists near record and listed it as the second highest single-game assist total in Women's World Cup qualifying tournaments since that event format began in 2022. And that is why this story is bigger than a simple comeback. Because this was not just about Clark returning. It was about what her return revealed. Team USA suddenly looked faster, sharper, and far more explosive the moment she settled in. Paige Buchers was there. Angel Reese was there. A new generation was on the floor together. And by the end of the night, the biggest question was no longer whether Clark was fully back. The real question was how quickly this performance changes everything around her, from Team USA's lineup to the conversation around women's basketball heading into the next phase. 239 days is a long time to disappear from real competition. Not highlights, not training clips, not controlled scrimmages. Real basketball. The kind where every possession matters and every mistake gets punished. And for Caitlin Clark, those 239 days weren't quiet. They were loud in a different way. Because while she wasn't playing, the spotlight didn't go anywhere. If anything, it got bigger. Her 2025 season had been interrupted early, forcing her into months of rehab, recovery, and controlled workouts. No crowds. No real opponents. Just repetition, conditioning, and waiting. And that kind of gap creates a very specific kind of pressure. Not just physical uncertainty, but mental noise. Questions start stacking up. Timing, rhythm, decision-making speed. Would it all still be there when the lights came back on? But at the exact same time, something unusual was happening around her. FIBA and its broadcast partners were pushing her as the face of the tournament. Her image was everywhere. Posters, promotions, social media campaigns. Before she even stepped on the court, she had already been positioned as the centerpiece of the entire event. And that creates a strange contradiction. A player who hasn't competed in months, being marketed like the biggest star in the building. That kind of expectation can break players. Because now it's not just about returning. It's about living up to something that has already been decided for you. Fans show up expecting a show. Cameras are already locked in. Every possession feels like it's being evaluated before it even happens. And most players in that situation ease their way in. They take safer shots. They make simpler reads. They try to settle into the flow of the game before doing anything risky. Especially after a long layoff, the instinct is to avoid mistakes. But Clark didn't walk into this game thinking like that. Before tip-off, she admitted she expected to feel some nerves. That's normal. But what stood out was how she described the moment. Not pressure, not fear, just excitement. Pure excitement to be back on the floor, to finally feel the pace of a real game again, to compete. And that mindset matters more than people think. Because when a player is thinking about avoiding mistakes, they play slower. When a player is thinking about opportunity, they play faster. And speed, especially in international basketball, changes everything. What made this even more interesting was how Clark framed her role before the game even started. She didn't walk in talking about scoring. She didn't talk about taking over. She made it clear this wasn't going to be about being the star. That tells you something. That tells you she came in with a plan, a specific understanding of how this level works. That Team USA isn't built around one player dominating the ball. It's built around movement, spacing, and decision-making at a very high speed. So the real question wasn't whether Caitlin Clark could score. It was whether, after 239 days away, she could process the game fast enough to control it. And what happened next answered that question faster than anyone expected. When the starting lineup was announced, something immediately felt off. Caitlin Clark wasn't in it. For a player who had been placed at the center of the entire tournament's promotion, for someone coming in as arguably the most talked-about name on the roster, the expectation was simple: she would start. That's how these situations usually play out. The biggest name, the biggest spotlight, the first introduction. But Cara Lawson went in a completely different direction. Chelsea Gray got the starting nod at point guard. And on paper, it made perfect sense. Gray is a proven veteran, a champion, a player who understands how to control tempo under pressure, how to organize an offense, how to keep things steady when the game gets chaotic. In a high-level international setting, that kind of experience is incredibly valuable. So the decision wasn't random. It was calculated. Lawson wasn't thinking about hype. She was thinking about control, about structure, about starting the game with stability before introducing a different dynamic off the bench. But here's where things started to shift. Because Senegal didn't come out playing a passive, wait-and-see style. They came out aggressive. Full-court pressure. Traps. A blitz-heavy defensive scheme designed to disrupt the backcourt before the offense could even begin. And suddenly, that stable starting lineup didn't look so stable. The ball started moving sideways instead of forward. Players were forced into uncomfortable positions just to handle the pressure. Possessions became slower, more reactive. Instead of dictating the pace, Team USA was adjusting to it. Within seconds, things began to break down. The primary ball-handling responsibilities started shifting away from the point guard position. Other players had to step in just to manage the pressure. The flow wasn't there. The rhythm wasn't there. And most importantly, the control wasn't there. This wasn't dominance. This was survival. And that's the key difference. Because against a defense built to create chaos, surviving isn't enough. You need someone who can flip that chaos into an advantage. Someone who doesn't just handle pressure, but uses it. And at that moment, that player wasn't on the floor yet. From a coaching perspective, this is where things get interesting. Because decisions like this aren't just about one game. They're about hierarchy, about roles, about trust. Starting a veteran over a rising star sends a message about structure. But games don't always follow structure. Sometimes they expose it. And as the first stretch of this game unfolded, it became clear that something was missing. Not effort, not talent, something more specific. Speed of decision-making. The ability to see the defense before it fully forms. To anticipate instead of react. To turn pressure into opportunity instead of trying to escape it. And that's when everything was about to change. Because the moment Caitlin Clark checked into the game, the entire tone shifted. The moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto the floor, the game didn't gradually improve. It flipped. Not over a quarter. Not over a stretch of minutes. Instantly. Her first touch, assist. Second touch, assist. Third touch, assist. No warm-up. No hesitation. No feeling out the defense. Just immediate control. And that's what made it so jarring. Because this wasn't a player slowly working her way back into rhythm after 239 days away. This was someone stepping into live competition and dictating the pace within seconds. The entire energy of the game shifted the moment the ball started moving through her hands. The same full-court pressure that had been disrupting the starting unit suddenly looked ineffective. Not because Senegal stopped applying it, but because Clark was reading it differently. Where others saw pressure, she saw openings. Where others slowed down, she sped the game up. Every trap that came toward her wasn't something to escape. It was something to exploit. Two defenders commit? That means someone is open. And she was finding that open player before the trap could even close. That's not just skill. That's anticipation at a completely different level. The passes weren't flashy for the sake of it. They were precise, timed perfectly, delivered exactly where they needed to be. Teammates weren't just receiving the ball, they were receiving it in rhythm, in space, ready to score. And that changes everything. Because now the defense has a problem it didn't have before. If you keep blitzing, you're giving up clean looks. If you stop blitzing, you're giving Clark space to operate. Either way, you're reacting instead of controlling. And once that shift happens, it spreads. The entire team starts moving differently. Players run the floor harder because they know the ball will find them. Shooters space out because they trust the pass is coming. The offense stops feeling forced and starts feeling automatic. That's what control looks like. And it showed up immediately in one specific connection that Senegal couldn't figure out how to stop. Clark and Ryan Howard. Every time the defense collapsed, Howard was there. On the perimeter. Ready. And the passes kept coming. Clean. On time. Perfectly placed. Shot after shot started falling, and suddenly what was supposed to be defensive pressure turned into a highlight reel for Team USA. This wasn't just one player playing well. This was one player elevating everyone else on the floor. And that's where the difference became impossible to ignore. Because the starting unit had been trying to manage the game. Clark was controlling it. And as that control tightened, something else started happening quietly in the background. Something that no one fully realized until after the game ended. The numbers. Because while the pace was shifting and the offense was exploding, statisticians were already starting to notice something unusual. And what they discovered made this performance go from impressive to historic. By the time the final whistle blew, the scoreboard told one story. But the numbers told a completely different one. Because while most people were focused on the 64-point blowout, something much bigger had quietly unfolded underneath it. Something that didn't just stand out for this game. It stood out across the entire history of FIBA competition. Caitlin Clark played just 19 minutes. In those 19 minutes, she recorded 12 assists. Pause on that for a second. 12 assists. In under 20 minutes. In her first real game back after 239 days. Against a defense specifically designed to force mistakes. And here's the part that makes it even more absurd. 0 turnovers in the first half. Not one. That alone would have been enough to make headlines. But when analysts and statisticians started digging deeper into the numbers, they realized this wasn't just an efficient performance. It was historic. Record number 1. The most assists ever recorded in a Team USA senior national team debut. Not just for women. For anyone. Any era. Any player who has ever worn that jersey for the first time. Gone. Record number 2. The highest assist total in a senior national team debut across all countries in FIBA competition. That means every player, from every nation, across decades of international basketball. Also gone. Record number 3. Second most assists in the history of FIBA qualifying tournaments. Not just debuts anymore. Now we're talking about every single qualifying game ever played. And she did it in 19 minutes. Record number 4. Most assists ever recorded by a bench player in FIBA history. Men or women. Doesn't matter. No one has come off the bench and distributed the ball at that level. Until now. And then there's record number 5. 8 assists in the first half, with 0 turnovers. That's not just efficient. That's almost impossible. Because high assist numbers usually come with risk. You're pushing the tempo. You're threading passes into tight windows. You're making aggressive reads. Mistakes are part of that process. But Clark removed the mistakes. She kept the aggression, kept the pace, kept the pressure on the defense, and somehow eliminated the downside completely. That's not normal basketball. That's control at a level you rarely see, even from elite players. And the craziest part? This wasn't a game where she was just passing the ball around safely to build numbers. These were high-impact assists, fast break setups, kickouts under pressure, reads made before the defense even had time to adjust. Every pass had purpose. Every decision had speed. Every possession felt like it was being processed one step ahead of everyone else on the court. So when people say she broke 5 records, it sounds impressive. But it doesn't fully explain what actually happened. Because this wasn't just about breaking records. It was about how easily they were broken. And that's the part that should make everyone pay attention. On paper, the numbers already looked ridiculous. But the numbers didn't fully capture the problem Caitlin Clark created on the floor. Because this wasn't just a case of a player having a hot game. This was a system-breaking performance. Senegal didn't come into this game with a weak defensive plan. The full-court blitz they were running is specifically designed to do one thing: force guards into mistakes. Trap early, cut off passing lanes, speed up decision-making, and turn possessions into turnovers. It works on most players, even elite ones. Because under that kind of pressure, the natural reaction is hesitation. You pick up your dribble too early. You make a rushed pass. You try to escape instead of attack. But Clark wasn't reacting. She was predicting. Before the trap even fully formed, she already knew where the ball was going. That's what made the difference. The defense wasn't late. It wasn't slow. It was just one step behind every time. And when that happens, the entire defensive strategy collapses. Every blitz turned into a disadvantage. 2 defenders committing to the ball meant someone else was wide open. And not just open, open in rhythm. Ready to shoot without hesitation. And that's where the damage really started stacking up. Ryan Howard became the biggest beneficiary. Possession after possession, the same pattern kept repeating. Clark draws the pressure. The defense collapses. The ball gets kicked out. Howard fires. And it goes in. Again. And again. And again. Now the defense has a decision to make. Keep blitzing and give up clean perimeter shots. Or back off and let Clark operate with space. Both options are bad. Because if you stop the blitz, now you're dealing with a playmaker who has time to read everything. If you keep it, you're essentially handing out open looks to shooters. That's what makes this performance dangerous. It creates a no-win situation. And it didn't stop at Howard. The entire team started benefiting from it. Players cutting to the basket were getting the ball exactly when they needed it. Bigs inside were finishing easy looks because the defense was already stretched thin. Transition opportunities increased because the pressure was being turned into fast breaks instead of turnovers. Everything became easier. And that's the real impact of elite playmaking. It doesn't just show up in assists. It shows up in how simple the game suddenly looks for everyone else. And Clark was doing all of this while still scoring efficiently herself. 17 points. 4 of 5 from 3. Perfect from the free throw line. Only one missed shot the entire game. So now you're dealing with a player who can control the pace, create for others, and score at a high level, all in limited minutes. That combination is what changes teams. Because now it's not just about one player being good. It's about how that player reshapes the entire system. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Not for the opponent, but for Team USA itself. And this is where the story quietly shifts from dominance to tension. Because everything you just saw happened with Caitlin Clark coming off the bench. Let that sink in. The player controlling the game, breaking records, and completely flipping the pace wasn't even in the starting lineup. That creates a problem. Not a loud one. Not something anyone is going to say directly in a press conference. But internally, it's impossible to ignore. Because basketball has a hierarchy. Starters, bench players, roles, minutes, trust. And when a bench player clearly outperforms the starting unit, that hierarchy starts to crack. After the game, Kara Lawson didn't deny it. She didn't double down on the original decision. She didn't say everything was set. Instead, she used a very specific phrase. We're still figuring it out. That sounds harmless. But in coaching language, that means change is coming. Because if everything was working, there would be nothing to figure out. And the way she talked about Clark made it even more obvious. She didn't describe her like a role player. She didn't talk about her as someone easing into the system. She called her one of the most dynamic playmakers in the world. She pointed directly to the second quarter lineup, the one built around Clark, as the group that took the team to a different level. That's not accidental wording. That's acknowledgement. So now the question becomes unavoidable. What do you do with the starting lineup? Chelsea Gray is still a veteran, still experienced, still valuable. But the contrast in this game was clear. One unit was trying to manage pressure. The other was turning that same pressure into offense. And at the center of that difference was Clark. This isn't just about one game, either. Because once a player shows they can control the game at that level, you can't unsee it. Coaches can experiment. They can rotate. But eventually, production forces decisions. And this is where it gets even more interesting. Because it's not just about who starts. It's about how the team is built moving forward. Do you prioritize experience and control? Or do you lean into speed, pace, and playmaking at a completely different level? That's not a small adjustment. That's a philosophical shift. And based on everything Lawson said after the game, it feels like she already knows which direction this is heading. Because when a lineup takes you to another level, you don't ignore it. You build around it. And if that happens, it doesn't just change the starting five. It changes everything about how Team USA plays going forward. What happened in this game wasn't just a breakout performance. It was a preview. Because when you step back and look at it, this wasn't just Caitlin Clark returning. This was multiple pieces coming together at the same time. Paige Buchers stepping onto the senior stage. Angel Reese locking into her role. A wave of new talent entering the system all at once. And for the first time, you could actually see how it fits. This wasn't random. Kara Lawson has been building towards something bigger. A roster that can play fast, switch lineups without losing rhythm, and keep the pressure on for 40 minutes straight. Not just talent, but interchangeable pieces that all understand how to move, how to space, and how to make quick decisions. And in this game, that vision started to look real. Because when Clark was running the offense, everything sped up, but it didn't fall apart. That's the key. Fast teams can be chaotic. But this wasn't chaos. This was controlled speed. Every pass had purpose. Every movement had timing. Every possession felt connected. That's a system. And when it works, it becomes very hard to stop. Now add in the generational angle. Clark, Buchers, Reese. That's not just a lineup. That's a foundation. Players who can handle the ball, create, score, defend, and adapt. Players who grew up in a different version of the game, faster, more spaced out, more skill-driven. And now they're all stepping into the same system at the same time. That's not something you see often. And it matters because of what's coming next. This isn't about one qualifier game. This is about where Team USA is heading over the next few years. The 2028 Olympics, future World Cups, the next era of international basketball. And based on what this game showed, the ceiling is different. Not slightly higher. Different. Because when you have a player who can control pace like Clark, you're not just running plays anymore. You're dictating how the entire game is played. Opponents have to adjust to you. Defenses have to react to your decisions instead of executing their own plan. That's how dominant teams are built. And there's another layer to this. Because what Clark did here doesn't stay with Team USA. It carries over. The Indiana Fever are watching this. Fans are watching this. The way she processed the game, the way she handled pressure, the way she created opportunities. It all translates directly into what comes next at the professional level. So now you're not just looking at a strong national team performance. You're looking at momentum. Momentum that carries into the next season, into the next tournament, into every game where this version of Clark steps on the floor again. And that's why this moment matters. Because it wasn't just impressive. It was revealing. It showed what this team can become, and what happens when everything starts running through the right player. And at that point, there's really only one question left. Now here's the question that people are already starting to ask. How much of this was real? And how much of it was the opponent? Because Senegal isn't France. It's not Spain. It's not one of the top-tier international teams that can match Team USA possession for possession. A 64-point win looks incredible, but critics will say it doesn't prove everything. And that's fair. But here's what they're missing. This game was never really about Senegal. It was about what the system looked like when Caitlin Clark was running it at full speed. That doesn't change based on the opponent. The reads she made, the timing of her passes, the way she handled pressure before it even arrived, that translates against anyone. You can argue about scoring margins. You can argue about defensive resistance. But you can't fake processing speed. You can't fake control. And that's what stood out. Because even if the opponent gets tougher, the decisions remain the same. The ability to see the floor early, to anticipate rotations, to punish pressure, that doesn't disappear. If anything, it becomes more valuable. So the real takeaway from this game isn't the score. It's the ceiling. What does this team look like when the competition gets stronger, but the system stays the same? And more importantly, what does it look like when Caitlin Clark isn't coming off the bench anymore? Because that's where this is heading. You don't keep a player like that in a limited role for long. Not when the impact is this obvious. Not when the offense changes this dramatically the moment she steps in. So whether it happens next game or a few games down the line, the shift feels inevitable. And when it does happen, this version of Team USA becomes something entirely different. Faster, smarter, more difficult to defend than anything we've seen in recent years. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because it wasn't just a return. It was a signal. A signal that the next phase of Team USA basketball might already be here. 239 days away. One game. 19 minutes. And suddenly, 5 records are gone and the entire conversation has changed. That's not a normal comeback. That's a statement. And if this is just the beginning, then what comes next is going to be even bigger. So if you're watching this and you can feel that shift happening in real time, drop a comment right now. Welcome back, CC Record Breaker. Because this might be the moment everything started to change. And if you want to stay ahead of stories like this, where we break down what's really happening behind the stats, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. Because the next chapter of this story is already coming, and you don't want to miss it.